Let's talk about something that will completely reframe how you interpret distance from an avoidant. Because here's the shocking truth. When an avoidant disappears, it's not because they've lost interest. It's not because they've moved on. It's not even because you did something wrong. In fact, it's quite the opposite. They disappear to feel in control, not to forget you. You see, most people misinterpret emotional withdrawal as indifference, but that's a surface level understanding. You've got to dig deeper into the avoidant psyche. At the core of every avoidant is one central fear: losing emotional control. Emotional intimacy is not just uncomfortable for them, it's threatening, it's destabilizing. Because for an avoidant, closeness activates wounds that were never healed. And when those wounds get triggered, their nervous system goes into lockdown. Fight? No. Flight? Absolutely. They don't retreat to clear their heads. They retreat to protect their hearts from a perceived danger: you. And what makes you dangerous? You're the one who got too close. Now here's the psychological paradox that nobody talks about. The more emotionally significant you become to them, the more threatening your presence feels. That's why the people they care about the most, they run from the hardest. It's not because they don't feel anything, it's because they feel too much and have no tools to deal with it. So what do? They default to the only strategy they trust: distance. But don't confuse that with detachment. When they go silent, they're not deleting you, they're obsessing over you in private. The disappearance is not a sign of emotional emptiness, it's a sign of emotional overload. Avoidants are highly internal processors. When they retreat, they don't process their emotions in real time with you, they process alone. And during that isolation, their mind replays every detail, every look, every word, every message. You're not gone, you're on repeat. And this is what makes it so confusing for people on the other end. Because you're sitting there thinking, why would someone who loves me vanish like I never existed? But love for an avoidant doesn't look like what you've been taught to expect. It doesn't come with open arms. It comes with locked doors. Not because they want to push you away, but because they want to protect themselves from how vulnerable they feel in your presence. Let me tell you this: disappearing is their emotional self-defense. It's not you they're trying to escape. It's the version of themselves that starts surfacing when they feel emotionally exposed. When someone activates your wounds, your instincts kick in, and for the avoidant, that instinct is space. But here's the twist. The more space they take, the louder their internal dialogue becomes. The silence they create externally becomes noise internally. That's why no matter how long they stay silent, they rarely find peace in that solitude. Because it's not rejection, it's emotional obsession disguised as detachment. I want you to understand the deep irony here. The very act that makes you feel unwanted, their disappearance, is the same act that signals how emotionally destabilized they are by you. Think about that. It's not your lack of value that triggered their silence. It's your significance. And this is where most people get trapped. They internalize the silence. They make it about their worth. They start chasing. They over-communicate. They beg for clarity. But what they don't realize is the avoidant already feels emotionally ambushed. Every attempt to re-engage while they're in withdrawal feels like more pressure, more intensity, more chaos, and they're already drowning in emotion they can't name, let alone manage. So your pursuit pushes them deeper into the cave, reinforcing their original fear that closeness equals danger. So what do? You pull back, not out of revenge, not to play games, but to restore equilibrium for you. Because when an avoidant retreats, it's not a cue for you to chase. It's a cue for you to anchor. Let them feel the absence they created. Let them sit in the emotional turbulence they tried to avoid. Let them realize that their silence didn't give them peace, it gave them a deeper understanding of how much you matter. You don't prove your value by chasing someone who's hiding. You prove it by standing still in your worth, knowing that real connection doesn't require pursuit. It requires presence. And if they can't show up, then they're not rejecting you, they're rejecting themselves. The version of themselves they don't know how to handle when love gets real. So the next time they disappear, don't say, why did they leave me? Say, what truth are they running from within themselves? Because once you understand that, you stop taking it personally and start seeing the power in your presence. Obsession doesn't always knock loudly at your door. Sometimes it hides in silence, runs in retreat, it speaks in vanishing acts. But now you know better. And when you know better, you move differently. When you think of obsession, you probably imagine intensity. Picture someone who can't stay away, someone who's always reaching out, expressing their feelings, confessing their love in words and touch, in action. But that's just one version. And it's not the avoidant version. Avoidants are obsessed, but they hide it under layers of coldness, detachment, and emotional shutdown. It's not because they don't care. It's because they care so deeply that it terrifies them. Their behavior doesn't reflect how little you matter. It reflects how much power you unknowingly have over their internal world. When an avoidant acts cold, distant, or emotionally unavailable, most people interpret that as rejection. They're not into me. They don't love me. They've moved on. But let's be real. Emotional coldness from an avoidant isn't about you. It's about the conflict raging inside them. It's about a nervous system that equates closeness with threat, a mind wired to associate intimacy with danger. So instead of leaning in when feelings grow, they shut down. They freeze. They go numb, because numbness feels safer than vulnerability. But don't be fooled by the surface. That cold exterior, that's camouflage. It's emotional armor. Underneath it is a war zone, and you are the trigger. Not in a negative sense, but in a powerful, transformative sense. You represent something that shakes their emotional foundation. You make them feel something they don't have control over. And for an avoidant, losing emotional control feels like death. Their coldness is not the absence of emotion, it's the protection of it. You think they don't feel? No, they're feeling too much. More than they've ever allowed themselves to feel, and it scares them, so they mask it. They overcompensate with distance. They bury their emotions so deep that even they start to believe they don't exist. But here's the truth. The heart doesn't stop beating just because you ignore its rhythm. An obsession doesn't stop burning just because it's hidden. Let's go even deeper. Have you ever noticed how an avoidant can be totally detached one day and then suddenly reappear, acting confused and even irritated, like they can't figure out what they want? That's not randomness, that's inner obsession cracking through the mask. They've been holding back, suppressing, avoiding the truth of their feelings, but suppression always leaks. The coldness, the emotional withdrawal is not distance. It's the management of desire. It's their way of controlling what feels uncontrollable. And here's the psychological paradox. The more they crave you, the colder they become. Why? Because if they let themselves feel the full depth of that craving, they believe it would consume them. They're not used to being emotionally seen, emotionally felt, emotionally touched. So when someone comes along and awakens that part of them, the part that longs to connect, to attach, to be known, their instinct is to shut it down. Not because they don't want it, but because they don't know how to receive it without losing themselves. But you're not supposed to be their emotional rescuer. You're not meant to tear down their walls. That's not your job. Your power lies not in forcing them to show you their emotions, but in recognizing the coldness for what it is. Fear dressed as detachment. Craving disguised as control. Obsession hiding behind avoidance. And once you see it for what it truly is, everything shifts. You stop chasing clarity from someone who's unclear within themselves. You stop blaming yourself for someone else's inability to express emotion. And most importantly, you stop shrinking your own warmth just to match their freeze. Because listen, your presence didn't create their emotional dysfunction. It exposed it. You didn't make them cold. You just got close enough to feel the ice they've been using to survive. And sometimes the only way to feel in control when you're drowning in emotion is to act like you feel nothing at all. But you don't truly feel their wounds. You can't, because you see, but don't ever confuse emotional restraint with emotional absence. The heart of an avoidant may be hidden, but it's not empty. And once that cold mass begins to crack, it's not rejection that comes pouring out. It's every suppressed feeling they never had the courage to say. So the next time they act cold, remember this. They're not pushing you away because they don't care. They're pushing you away because they care more than they've ever admitted, and they have no idea what to do with that level of vulnerability. What you see as rejection might actually be obsession, frozen, buried, but burning just beneath the surface. And when you realize that, you stop doubting your impact and start protecting your peace. Let's rip the mask off this illusion right now, because one of the biggest lies people believe when an avoidant disappears is they're not thinking about me. And nothing could be further from the truth. The silence you hear isn't absence, it's noise, but it's all happening inside them. Here's what they'll never admit. Avoidants don't just walk away and erase you, they walk away and watch. They're observing, lurking, quietly tracking your moves from a distance they feel safe behind. You think you've been forgotten? No. You've become a private obsession, a ghost they can't stop chasing in their mind. But instead of leaning in, they study you from the shadows. This isn't a romantic fantasy, it's psychological pattern. Avoidants are often hypervigilant, wired to observe before they engage. It's how they've survived emotionally. When real connection shows up, it overwhelms them, so they retreat. But retreat doesn't equal amnesia. They may block you, ignore your messages, stop initiating, but they're still plugged into your energy. They're watching your stories, checking your last scene, asking mutual friends about you. And if they're not watching with their eyes, they're replaying your last interaction in their mind like a broken record they can't stop spinning. Because you have to understand this. Avoidants aren't disconnected. They're disguised. And silence isn't their peace, it's their prison. They hide from intimacy, not because they don't feel it, but because it short circuits their internal wiring. When they start catching real feelings, the emotional pressure builds and they eject. But that ejection doesn't clear the system, it clogs it. The feelings don't vanish, they intensify, they accumulate, they sit heavy on their chest in quiet moments. In the middle of the night when your name rises in their mind like a wave they can't outrun. Most people think if they cared, they'd reach out. That's the standard logic. But it doesn't apply here. With avoidance, inward fixation replaces outward communication. Reaching out requires vulnerability. Vulnerability requires safety. And safety, for them, is a rare currency they don't hand out, not even to themselves. So what do? They observe from afar. It gives them the illusion of control. They can stay emotionally connected without being exposed. It's like watching fire from behind a glass wall. Warm enough to feel something, distant enough to avoid getting burned. But here's where things get even more complicated. This silent obsession can last for months, even years. You might think they're done with you. You might have even moved on, but they're still running diagnostics in their mind. Still wondering, are you thinking about me? Do you miss me? Have you replaced me? They don't ask you, they ask themselves. And in that loop, they keep you alive in their inner world even while they maintain total silence in the outer one. This is what makes avoidant attachment so emotionally misleading, because the emotional investment is hidden. It doesn't come out through words, reassurance, affection, or consistency. It leaks through indirect behaviors. Subtle check-ons, random likes, old pictures viewed again, late night nostalgia. They think you don't notice. They think they're managing the obsession, but it's managing them. And if you've ever wondered why someone who walks away still circles back, still pops up when you least expect it, this is why. The obsession never left. It was just lurking beneath the silence. You were always present. You were always in their psyche. But because they don't know how to process attachment in real time, they delay it, distort it, detach from it until it pulls them right back in. And this is why you have to stay grounded in your truth. You can't base your worth on their visible actions alone. You can't assume their silence means you're invisible. Because to an avoidant, you're not just visible, you're unforgettable. They just don't know how to hold on to someone without feeling like they're losing themselves. So while you're rebuilding, healing, regaining your peace, they're watching. Not because they're waiting to love you better, but because they're trying to make sense of what they felt. They don't want to need you, but they do. They don't want to miss you, but they can't stop. And the most haunting part of all, they don't know what to do with any of it. That's not rejection. That's unprocessed obsession in its rawest form. So don't be fooled by the silence. Don't let the stillness deceive you. Sometimes the ones who watch you the hardest are the ones who ran the fastest. And the further they run, the more they realize they were never running from you. They were running from how deeply they felt you. And let's cut to the core of the confusion. Because if you've ever felt like an avoidant was playing mind games with you, you're not wrong, but not in the way you think. The truth is, many avoidants aren't consciously manipulating you. They're not sitting in a dark room planning how to make you suffer. What's really happening is far more unconscious, far more primal, and far more revealing. Avoidants often push you away to see if you'll chase. Now, that might sound toxic on the surface, but let's go deeper. This isn't about ego. It's about fear and programming. See, avoidants have been wired, usually since childhood, to equate closeness with danger. They've learned that love isn't safe, that being vulnerable leads to pain, betrayal, suffocation, or rejection. So when they feel themselves becoming emotionally dependent on someone, even in a good way, alarm bells go off. Their system doesn't differentiate between healthy intimacy and emotional invasion. It just panics. And in that panic, they do the one thing they've always done to survive emotionally. They create distance. But here's the kicker. That distance isn't just about escape. It's also a test. And it's not a game they plan. It's a subconscious survival reflex. They're not trying to hurt you. They're trying to protect themselves from the overwhelming experience of needing someone who could leave them, or worse, see through them. So when they withdraw, it's often a way of asking, will you still love me if I disappear? Will you prove that you'll come after me? Will you show me that you won't abandon me, even if I try to push you away first? Twist it, isn't it? But this is the emotional boomerang of avoidant attachment. Deep down, they're hoping you'll chase them, not because they want control over you, but because it temporarily soothes the fear that love is unsafe. Your pursuit becomes their reassurance. Your refusal to give up becomes their evidence that they're finally worth staying for. But here's the trap. The moment you chase, their alarm system gets triggered again and the cycle restarts. Push, chase, pull back, reach out, get close, shut down. It's a psychological dance. One where you're always trying to decode their silence, and they're always testing your consistency through distance. Now let's be clear. Just because this pattern is unconscious doesn't make it okay. You cannot build a healthy, empowered relationship with someone who only feels secure when you're proving your love through their avoidance. That's not love. That's emotional survival masquerading as connection. And here's what most people get wrong. They think if they just chase harder, love louder, show up more consistently, they'll finally convince the avoidant to open up and stay. But that logic only works in healthy emotional systems. With an avoidant, the more you chase, the more their fear of engulfment intensifies. You don't become the safe person, you become the overwhelming person. And instead of running toward you, they retreat even deeper into isolation, into silence, into emotional paralysis. So what's the shift? The shift is this. You stop chasing and start observing. You stop personalizing their pushback and start recognizing the pattern. You realize that their withdrawal isn't about you being unworthy. It's about them being terrified of their own emotional capacity. You learn to meet their test not with pursuit, but with presence, with groundedness, with a refusal to self-abandon just to prove your place in someone else's chaos. That's the power move most people never make, because it feels counterintuitive. Everything in you wants to reconnect, to repair, to chase after what feels like love slipping away. But if you do that with an avoidant, you reinforce the very fear they're trying to escape. That closeness will cost them their emotional safety. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is not run after someone when they pull away. Not out of anger, not out of punishment, but out of deep, grounded understanding that real love cannot be built on repeated emotional tests. If they want to know your love is real, let them experience it in your stability, not your desperation. And here's the kicker. The moment you stop chasing, something inside them starts to shift. For the first time, they're forced to sit with their own pattern. They're forced to ask, why didn't they chase me this time? And it's in that moment of discomfort, that break in the cycle, where transformation becomes possible. It's in your stillness that they're finally confronted with the emotional weight they've been running from all along, themselves. So if you're dealing with an avoidance, remember this. Every time they push you away, they're not trying to end things. They're trying to test something. But it's not your job to keep passing those tests. It's your job to recognize when you're in a game you never agreed to play. Stop chasing ghosts. Let your presence speak louder than your pursuit. Because the person who's meant for you will not need you to prove your love through silence, distance, or pain. They'll feel safe enough to meet you, face to face, heart to heart, no test required. Let's unpack something that most people completely misunderstand when it comes to avoidant behavior. Silence. We tend to associate silence with apathy, with detachment, with the absence of care. And in healthy communication models, that might be true. But when you're dealing with an avoidant, silence doesn't mean they've checked out emotionally. It often means the exact opposite. They're overwhelmed. They're caught in an internal storm of emotions they can't name, let alone express. And silence becomes the only thing they can control. But make no mistake, that silence is screaming. Avoidants don't talk through their feelings. They retreat from them. Their internal wiring tells them that vulnerability is dangerous. So instead of speaking, they shut down. Instead of expressing confusion, they disappear. Instead of saying, I miss you, they go quiet and wait for the storm to pass. But during that silence, they're not numb. They're overstimulated. Their silence isn't a sign of peace. It's a sign that their emotional system is on overload. Imagine being terrified of your own emotions and then falling for someone who triggers all of them at once. That's what it's like for an avoidant. You think they're calm in their silence, but they're not. They're cycling through what ifs, replays, regrets, questions they'll never ask out loud. They're reliving old wounds while trying to suppress new ones. They're feeling everything, but instead of letting it out, they shut the door, throw away the key, and pretend nothing is happening. But here's where it gets even more interesting. The more silent they become, the more active their internal dialogue gets. You are not gone from their mind. You've become the loop they can't escape. Every moment of distance, every hour of not reaching out is not time spent forgetting you. It's time spent obsessing over you without a release valve. They don't speak because they don't know how to say what they feel without cracking. So they keep it in. They keep it all in, and that is exactly why it never leaves them. And this is the tragedy, because you, on the receiving end of that silence, start to question your worth. You wonder, how could someone who cared say nothing? But they're not saying nothing because they don't care. They're saying nothing because they care too much and don't know how to manage it. For an avoidant, silence becomes their survival strategy, not because they're emotionally empty, but because they're emotionally flooded. And the flood terrifies them. Now think about this. In relationships, we often want communication to feel natural and open. But with avoidance, the more intense the connection becomes, the more they retreat. Why? Because words are vulnerable. Words make it real. And real requires presence. Real requires effort. Real requires being seen. And that, for someone who spent a lifetime building walls, feels like emotional exposure on a level they've never been taught how to handle. So instead, they stay quiet. They hope the feelings will pass. They hope you'll move on so they won't have to confront what's been awakened inside them. But it doesn't work. Because in your silence, when you stop reaching out, when you stop trying to fix the disconnection, the weight of their emotions starts to hit even harder. Their silence becomes a mirror, and they're forced to sit in what they tried to avoid. This is why many avoidants circle back after the silence. Not because they've suddenly discovered something new, but because the silence didn't relieve the obsession, it intensified it. It forced them to sit in the discomfort they thought distance would resolve. They didn't find relief, they found a deeper longing, a deeper ache, a louder silence. And often they realized too late that what they needed to say should have been said when they still had the chance. But here's what matters for you. You need to stop translating their silence as your inadequacy. You need to stop thinking their avoidance is your failure. You can't keep questioning your worth based on someone else's inability to process their emotions. Their silence has nothing to do with your value. It has everything to do with their emotional blueprint and how ill-equipped they are to handle deep, real, confronting love. So what do you do when their silence screams? You listen, but not with your ears. You listen with your understanding. You recognize the pattern. You don't chase. You don't beg. You don't fill the void with self-doubt. You hold your center. Because if someone can't meet you with voice, with vulnerability, with truth, then no amount of silence should make you question your voice, your presence, or your worth. Sometimes the loudest cry for connection comes dressed in silence. But it's not your job to decode it. It's your job to stand in your clarity and remember, just because they won't speak their truth doesn't mean you should forget yours. Here's something you need to hear, and maybe no one's ever told you this before. When an avoidant runs, when they vanish, when they pull away without warning or explanation, they're not running from you. They're running from the version of themselves that gets activated when you're around. And that version, it terrifies them. Avoidants aren't afraid of love. They're afraid of what love does to them. See, when someone with an avoidant attachment style starts catching real feelings, not the shallow surface kind they can manage and control, but the deep, raw kind that strips away their defenses, something very specific happens. Their system crashes. Emotionally, psychologically, even physiologically, they start to feel like they're losing control. They don't recognize themselves. And instead of leaning into that transformation, they bolt fast. But what you need to understand is this: you didn't cause that, you revealed it. The deeper truth is that the avoidant has spent most of their life compartmentalizing, splitting off parts of themselves to stay functional. They suppress their vulnerability. They suppress their dependency needs. They suppress anything that feels too much, including affection, longing, intimacy, and yes, love. And then you come along, and suddenly the compartments collapse. The feelings come rushing in. They start to feel seen, truly seen, maybe for the first time in their life, and the instinctive response isn't gratitude, it's panic. Why? Because being seen means being known. And being known for an avoidant often feels like being exposed. And exposure, that equals threat. So what do? They run, but again, hear me, they are not running from your presence. They are running from the parts of themselves they don't know how to manage when they're with you. That emotional chaos, that inner conflict, that terrifying sense of dependency they never asked for, That's what they're fleeing. And this is where people get trapped. You start to believe their flight is about your inadequacy. You begin to think, maybe I was too intense, too emotional, too available. But let me be absolutely clear. Your depth didn't scare them. Their depth did. You didn't overwhelm them with your presence. They were overwhelmed by how present they suddenly felt, how emotionally open, how unguarded, how real everything became. And when you've been living behind an emotional mask for years, real is dangerous. So when they vanish, when they create space, they tell themselves it's about needing clarity, but the truth is it's about needing distance from their own emotional activation. The silence isn't about forgetting you. It's about trying to forget the version of themselves that's surfacing because of you. The version that wants connection, that craves closeness, that secretly longs for safety, but doesn't trust it. And here's what no one tells you. This isn't just psychological. It's neurobiological. Their body is responding like it's under attack. Their nervous system is in survival mode. Intimacy feels like a threat to the avoidant brain, especially when it hasn't been safely experienced in the past. So instead of staying and regulating, they flee and dissociate. But guess what? That doesn't make them the villain. It makes them unhealed. It makes them unready. And no matter how much you love someone, no matter how much potential you see in them, you cannot heal the part of them they keep running from. You can't fight a ghost they haven't even acknowledged. So what's your move? You stand firm in your truth. You stop making their retreat about your worth. You stop personalizing behavior that's rooted in their history, not your value. And most importantly, you don't chase. You don't prove. You don't plead. Because when someone is running from themselves, they will always make you the excuse until they're ready to face their own reflection. Your job is not to be their safe place while they run from their own chaos. Your job is to be your own safe place, to hold space for your emotions, your dignity, your voice, and your clarity. If they return, it's not because you chased, it's because the silence confronted them with a version of themselves they could no longer ignore. And if they don't return, that's your clarity. That's your closure. Because love shouldn't require you to shrink, to wait, or to suffer in silence just to be worthy of being chosen. So remember this. When they run, they're not escaping you. They're avoiding the mirror you became. You didn't break them, you reflected them. And sometimes the most powerful thing you can do is walk away and let them face what they see.